Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We're going to be exploring something called the golden fish syndrome. From hidden norms to shameless greed, we're going to dive into this genuinely fascinating piece of writing that traces how society's relationship with greed hasn't just changed, it's shifted dramatically over a 30-year period. The author takes us on this profound journey, really looking at how our culture went from hiding its flaws behind these quiet, unwritten rules to a frankly alarming state of totally open entitlement. It's a brilliant psychological breakdown of how we define success, failure, and, honestly, the limits of our own desires. Okay, let's dive into this by taking a look at the title itself. Now, you might be wondering about the golden fish. We all know that classic fable, right? A poor fisherman catches a magical fish, and his wife just keeps demanding bigger and bigger wishes until she pushes way too far, loses absolutely everything, and ends up right back where she started. On the surface, sure, it's a simple story for kids, but the author challenges that naive view entirely, revealing it instead as a stark adult warning. It's not just about wanting nice things. It's a terrifying look at the sheer human inability to just stop. The source material maps out this historical view of greed, showing us that this isn't exactly a new phenomenon, it's a cycle. In fact, the author points out that this inability to be satisfied began all the way back with Eve in the Garden of Eden, and it's just repeated itself throughout history. But what makes this specific analysis so incredibly gripping is how the author narrows in on our modern era. They set up this really stark contrast between two very distinct periods, the society they observed back in 1995 and the reality they see approaching in 2026. So, let's break this down. Section 1, the 1995 reality, or what the author calls the gray area. Looking back at 1995, the author identifies this period as the era of the gray area. Societal corruption definitely existed, but it was sort of an accepted norm, right? It was a game played in the shadows, where bending the rules was kind of fine, as long as you didn't get caught. To illustrate this, the author describes how the government itself actively participated by creating these massive loopholes. They'd open up what the author calls a window the size of a door, totally disguised in the small print of a lawyer's contract. Authorities would offer perks, funds for fake professional literature, unnecessary car maintenance, bogus training courses, all just to win favor and votes. Basically, they gave people the tools to do job A while quietly intending for them to do job B. It made almost everyone a potential offender in this weird system of quiet complicity. And this gray area, it wasn't just financial, it was deeply social too. Have you ever had a colleague help you in a way that actually made you look way worse? Well, the author highlights a specific phrase used during this time: "I'll explain you better." I mean, it sounds polite, doesn't it? But actually, scratch that. It was a covert way of stepping on your peers to advance your own position. It was the classic 1995 game of backstabbing masked as helpfulness, where people were literally climbing over each other to get to the top of the social ladder. But here's the question. What happens when you play this social climbing game poorly? The author uses a fantastic metaphor for this. If you scheme your way into a position you really aren't qualified for, you get stuck. You become a nail without a head. Think about it. You can't function, but you also can't be easily pulled out. And here is the real kicker. When these people finally do get caught playing the system, their cries of, "But it's the norm, everyone does it," just fall on completely deaf ears. The very society that quietly encouraged the game suddenly refuses to listen. Now, before we jump forward to 2026, the author pauses to make this beautiful, absolutely vital distinction. They define material greed, which is that relentless pursuit of wealth, power, and status, versus spiritual greed, which is the boundless pursuit of knowledge, learning, and genuine understanding. And this brilliantly illustrates the core risk of the golden fish syndrome. Material greed carries this constant, terrifying risk of a painful downfall. The more comfortable and powerful you become, the more devastating the crash is going to be when you inevitably push too far and lose the whole shebang. Spiritual greed, on the other hand, it's completely different. The desire to learn has no limits, and more importantly, no crashes. It's an internal asset that you completely control. You can enrich yourself boundlessly without ever risking a collapse. Let's move the timeline forward. Section 2, the 2026 reality, the illusion of the peak. Fast forwarding 31 years to 2026, the author has this realization that their 1995 assessment was actually pretty naive. The true danger wasn't just hanging out on the societal fringes, it was sitting right at the very top. The author notes a pretty startling trend. High-ranking leaders, we're talking presidents and prime ministers who are practically living in palaces, are falling from grace and ending up in dark prison cells. And the real tragedy here is they didn't fall out of need. They fell from pure excess and from an utter inability to simply say enough. Which brings us to Section 3, the 2026 reality, the loss of shame. This right here is the core thesis of the 2026 reality. The main concern isn't the gray area anymore. Society has transitioned into a highly dangerous phase characterized by the absolute loss of shame. It's a dramatic psychological shift. Back in 1995, the mindset was, okay, this is forbidden, but everyone does it, so I'll just do it quietly. But by 2026, that mindset has warped entirely into, this is allowed simply because I have the power to do it. No apologies, no hiding, just the brazen, open exercise of raw power. To capture this perfectly, the author uses a wildly vivid Hebrew idiom, peeing from the diving board. It's a striking, even somewhat shocking image, right? But it hits the nail on the head. It means doing something entirely corrupt, not quietly hiding in a corner, but right up high, in broad daylight, in front of absolutely everybody, without a single ounce of embarrassment. And the author points to specific societal observations to back this all up. They describe a reality where public officials literally shamelessly triple their own salaries, all while handing the general public mere crumbs. And perhaps most tellingly, the author observes that foundational moral codes, even something as universally recognized as the Ten Commandments, are simply ignored. The source notes that these moral anchors no longer seem to bind anyone, not even those who claim to be deeply religious. The rules simply don't apply if you have enough power. So, where does that leave us? Let's look at Section 4, the antidote to greed. After mapping out this pretty grim evolution, how do we reconcile this destructive cycle? Well, the author transitions to a deeply personal conclusion, turning to ancient wisdom with the quote, "Who is rich? He who is happy with his lot." Now, the author isn't using this to be preachy. It's presented more as a quiet, profound realization that true wealth isn't about the endless accumulation of more. It's the internal discipline of finding contentment with what you have. So the crucial point is really captured here. The author grounds all of these massive ego trips, all the castles, the titles, and the political power, right back down to simple, undeniable human reality. Ultimately, the endless chase finishes at the exact same finish line for everyone. You can't take power, you can't take property, you can't even take a pair of worn-out socks with you to the grave. It just strips away all the illusions of the material world. And this brings the entire metaphor of our explainer beautifully full circle. You see, the magic of the golden fish didn't just vanish. The opportunity for a good life was always right there. The tragedy of the fable, and really the tragedy of our modern society, according to the author, is simply that we didn't know when to stop. We didn't know when to say thank you and just return the fish to the sea. Which leaves us with this final, provocative question to ponder today. Looking at the world around us, have we finally learned to ask for less? Have we found that spiritual greed for knowledge over material wealth? Or are we, as a society, still blindly pushing for that one final unnecessary wish, the one that erases everything we've built? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you as much to think about as it did me.